today. I would like to start this session by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land from wherever you are dialing in from today. I'm dialing in from the land of the Bunurong people on the Mornington Peninsula of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respect to elders past and present. I'd like to acknowledge anyone with lived experience or caring for those with mental ill health. This will be covered today during difficult and challenging conversations. I would like to introduce Bill Carson as your host for today's session. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Carli. Lovely to be here as always.
Thank you. Let's take a minute now. Would you like to introduce yourself to everybody, and then I will do some formalities?
Yes. It's great to be here, Carli. It's a favourite topic of mine. I've been doing Lifeline for 7 years. I've done over 700 hours of Lifeline work. It was part of my contribution, giving back to others of my gifts. Started 7 years ago. And I've run over 250 mental health first aid workshops. And one of the key themes in working with a lot of leaders, managers in those workshops is the challenges around having difficult and challenging conversations. Plus, I've got a lot of expertise around social emotional intelligence, coaching, resilience coaching, and originally a science degree in metallurgy. And worked in really strong interest and passion in psychology and teaching, and worked in corporate, and then worked in these areas in the last 6 or 7 years of my life, so which I really love. So thanks, Carla. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Bill. You can hear from that. Bill is an absolute expert in these topics. I'm really pleased he can deliver this content for you today. If you've never been to any of our sessions before, I just want to extend a very warm welcome to you. My name's Carli Phillips. I'm a Wellbeing keynote speaker. I'm the CEO of Corporate Wellbeing Hub, a researcher and a mental health first aider and nutritionist. Today I'm here just co-hosting with Bill, so it's lovely to see so many faces on the line today. We are going to be talking about a couple of things: how to be aware of the signs of a team member struggling, the communication skills to connect and support, what to say and what not to say, and also a little bit about well-being and self-care. So this session is about you, and it's about your workplace and what behaviour you can take back to your workplace. So we want to start by asking you this question: what has been your experience? Bill, we might need to do a little bit of explaining of what these options are that we've got on this first survey.
Yes. What we're wanting to do here, everyone, is get an idea of your experience in these particular examples of difficult, challenging conversations. And then also, if these don't resonate in any way, then pop into the chat, if you would, either the types of difficult, challenging conversations that you've been having, are having, likely to have. Yeah, capturing here what's been your experience. Person talks too much. One example.
So the easiest way to do this poll is just to scan the code you can see on the screen with your phone. It'll just take you straight to a link called Menti, and you can just type in your answer. You can also do it on a web browser if you want to. Open another one. You can see right at the top it says menti.com. That requires a code, so it might be easier just to use your phone. I'm just going to refresh this screen because sometimes it just needs a little wake up to get the response rates. There we go.
Okay, so thank you everyone for doing this. And then, as we said, if there are examples where these aren't relevant, but there's other examples in your own experience of difficult and challenging conversations, then please pop those into the chat. Person passively agrees. The person will not agree. Person defends and blames. That's a high one at this point, Carli.
It is, yeah.
Surprising.
I think we've all experienced that at some point in our life, right? Someone being really defensive.
Yeah, person is impatient. Person talks too much and tries to is one-sided.
It's going to do a
Um,
refresh of that.
Good.
Yeah, it looks like we're sitting pretty firmly in that middle one, person defending, blames or attacks.
Mm-hmm. And let's, are there any other responses that anyone would like to put into the chat? Any other different types of challenging or difficult conversations? Welcome, Carlos.
Right across the board, Bill, got a little bit of everything, I think.
Yeah, we have there, Carli, which is really particularly the big strong one is the person defending, attacking, and blaming. We see that from a certain individual with the orange hair who does it extremely well.
Vicky said the person who knows it all. And Marita says people get aggressive also and they think they are not wrong.
Yes, yes. Person becoming emotionally overwhelmed when issues are raised. Yeah, good. Thanks, Caitlin. Good. Okay, so let's start to dive in, Carli, and person wants to dominate and get their own way. Yep. So first of all, we're going to frame up a couple of definitions here between challenging conversations and difficult conversations, because it's really useful to identify that there are these differences. So, and we're going to focus on looking at this through the lens of, in the context of psychosocial hazards and risks, because that's pretty well on the radar for most organizations today. So first of all, challenging conversations address complex psychosocial issues that may impact the mental well-being of employees, but not necessarily characterized by immediate conflict and tension, such as workloads, preventing burnout, addressing the need for flexible work, or planning strategies. And one of the key distinctions here is that these interactions invariably will have differing viewpoints. And this is the key theme here, in that the other person is challenging, let's say, your perspective, your point of view, potentially elevated emotional intensity and perceived high stakes, where sometimes this is a win-lose seemed type scenario. It doesn't always have to be, but can often be perceived that way. Whereas with difficult conversations, what we're identifying here is that the individual themselves that you're having the conversation with is experiencing difficulties. And so these conversations are characterized by emotional tension, potential stigma, and the need to potentially address sensitive mental health issues that may result in discomfort, either for the individual that's experiencing that, or the person, manager, colleague, who's having the conversation with them. So around discussing mental health concerns, addressing issues in the workplace, such as bullying or harassment, and then it might be in the context of job security and employee well-being and change. And these are often conversations that can often be planned about a potentially uncomfortable topic, and where the goal is to share different perspectives, building mutual understanding and developing respect, and not to persuade and win. So it's a very difficult different conversation. So we see here challenging conversations are often associated with challenge, with some form of confrontation, but not always, but there's a fundamental theme. Whereas difficult conversations, the experience of the person that you're having the conversation with is that they're experiencing difficult feelings and experiences that they're grappling with. And so if we just look at the next slide, please, Carli. If we look at some of the broad statistics around this, 53% of employees are handling difficult emotions and situations by ignoring them. Now, there's quite a few of us who, when we're dealing with stressful situations, we either get angry, attack others, we internalize, attack self, I'm not good enough, we shame, or we freeze, avoid, procrastinate. And it's difficult sometimes to have these conversations. 60 to 80% of difficulties in organizations come from strained relationships and not having the ability to have these conversations. And then 70% of employees are avoiding difficult conversations with their boss and colleagues and so forth. And look, happy for you to put into the chat if you know, either agree or disagree or different perspectives on these challenges around communication in the work environment. And then if we go to the next slide, Carli, then you know, you can take over from here and we talk about the benefits and the costs.
Yeah, that 70% bill really surprises me. It's such a high percentage of people just avoiding the conversation. And so thinking about what is the cost of that if you just do not have that conversation, I think that's really interesting for us to think about. If we don't have the conversation, there could be some costs, such as not having any clarity or the person becoming disengaged, perhaps reduced motivation. There might be anxiety or uncertainty kind of builds because you're not putting stuff on the table. Could be poor workplace culture or communication breakdown. So I was working with some business owners during lockdown, and I clearly remember people saying, I'm just not asking people if they're okay because I know they're going to say no, and I actually can't deal with that right now. So there was a whole lot of people not having those conversations because everyone was in such a fragile state.
Yeah.
But if we move that over to actually looking at the benefits of having this conversation, we can clarify goals, we can address and resolve some issues, we can identify opportunities and needs. We definitely will get increased engagement. We might reveal blind spots, which is going to be useful for everybody to know. And we will be able to increase trust, respect, and inclusivity. So there's some really big benefits there when we actually do have these conversations.
Yep, spot on, Carli. So let's just take the examples that we highlighted at the front of this webinar. So how would you have these conversations? So let's take, for example, the first one. The person passively agrees to everything that you say or decide. Now, last week, I was doing some interviews for a workshop that I'm doing tomorrow. And I was talking with a senior manager, senior more in maturity rather than actually height in the organization. And one of the things that she said to me is that she had a performance conversation with her boss a number of weeks ago and basically agreed to everything that he said. And then a week later, when she started asking questions for clarity, his response was, well, we already talked about this and you agreed to it. Now, this is a classic example of, you know, people, depending on their style, you know, their head nods, they go, yes, yes, yes. And sometimes they need time to process information. And then the manager, not uncommonly, I've had the conversation with you, you said, yes, sir, now I expect you to implement. And sometimes one of the things that this woman shared with me, she said, look, I wasn't on my best day. I was a bit worried about my son. He's just going through a bit of stuff at school. He was going to a new school, and you know, and I would have appreciated if my manager had more awareness around me and really connecting with me and give me some time to work it through, rather than fundamentally coming from his, in this case, his own perspective. So they're starting to kind of unravel some of the personal aspects that are going on in these conversations, which sometimes we totally switch off to. Carli, did you want to talk to one of these as well yourself?
Yeah, that third one, Bill, is just standing out to me. There's an example I can think of within one of my old teams where there was a person who, every time we talked about a work-related task, was automatically on defense. And she
Mm,
would say, "Oh, no, that wasn't me," or "Oh, no, that's because of something else," or "Oh, no, you shouldn't have." And it was all, there was just no accountability. It was constantly just really defensive. And I didn't have a lot of awareness about that conversation for a while. And it kind of became this habit, right? This was the way we just communicated.
mm.
So I just stepped back from that and thought, how can we actually change this? And we had a conversation about our conversations, not about work. Like, how
Right.
do we actually want to communicate with each other? Can we try using different language? Can we try talking in a different way? And we actually needed that circuit breaker to be able to
Mm.
kind of change the way we conversed with each other. So that was really worthwhile, just taking that time to do that.
Yeah, yeah, lovely. And so one of the themes that we're essentially kind of exploring here is to add to a manager's skill set to be able to have the range of conversations, which could be difficult because there's often a lot of uncertainty, a lot of resistance for managers. Because manager brain wants to solve the problem, manager brain doesn't want to have to deal with other people's emotional stuff, etc. And we'll kind of dive into that a little bit more in a sec. So if we look at the next slide here, then essentially, as we've touched on, difficult, we're allocating that the capacity or the allocation of a difficult conversation is where the other person might be having some of their own difficulties, and they can be, quite significant. I've got another friend I was just talking to yesterday morning who's pretty, he's got a very demanding sales roles, head of sales, but he's going through an incredibly difficult situation where his wife has breast cancer and his business has zero sensitivity around his situation. Because I asked the question, have you kind of shared with these people what's going on for you? And in an environment where there's no awareness, no mental health safety, no consideration for the human being, and we've all experienced it, I've experienced it, then it puts enormous pressure on him. And Carli, you've experienced it yourself, when you were going through, years ago, you've shared how you're going through a really difficult time and your, husband, partner at the time was quite unwell and it
Yeah.
just blew you into burnout. Yeah.
Yeah, because nobody ever, even when I was showing the signs, let me just flick over to this. I was showing so many signs of distress, and my manager didn't notice or certainly didn't say anything. No one in my team did anything. And something that could have been, I could have been really well supported early on and nothing was done. And it built and built and built until I burnt out and needed to take so much time off work. So had someone had that conversation earlier, it would have prevented all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So key theme here is the C word, changes, having the awareness, noticing, and because if your pure manager brain is just performance focused, outcome focused, results focused all the time, they're not seeing the changes that are going on in the individual. And we've all had the experience, when you're in a good place, when everything's working for you, then yes, we're showing up, we're doing 100, 110, 120%. But then when stuff happens in our lives, then there needs to be that awareness and that sensitivity. And it will show up in these behavioral and physical indicators. And if we look at the next slide as well, Carli, it shows up in the context of lateness and low morale and those aspects of, from a performance point of view, lack of cooperation, decreased productivity, increased incidents and accidents. So these are the sort of outward, sort of normal, classical, physical kind of signs we'd see. And the big problem is that most managers and people generally don't know how to respond appropriately. So what would that look like if they were responding appropriately? If we look at the next slide, Carli, then what happens is that we're increasing, there's no blame here, there's no making managers wrong. It's about increasing the capacity for managers to, yes, do what they have to do, which is very task-focused, performance-focused conversations. But also what's super needed these days is the ability to actually have person-centered conversations and build their empathy skills. And empathy, we'll touch on this shortly. A lot of people don't understand empathy and they think it's sympathy, and it's really messy. And I'll explain that in a moment. And so what we teach is a structure around, if we look at the next slide, Carli, that essentially teaches managers to be self-aware and aware of the others. And this is really important because if you're not in a good place, if you're feeling pretty grumpy, and as we've identified, if your manager is under quite a lot of stress, that's not a good time necessarily to have a person-centered, safe conversation. The capacity to acknowledge, and the distinction of around acknowledging versus agreeing, what questions to ask. Sometimes managers don't know what questions to ask. How do you focus on listening? What are you listening for? And then the empower element is incredibly important because we're wanting to help the person to access their own resources. So a key theme here is that manager brain gets turned off and the person or the manager is invited to connect, reflecting feelings, using good interpersonal skills to then invite the other person to develop their own self-awareness and then identify what resources would be most useful for them in the situation, in the difficulty that they're currently experiencing. So further to that, just elaborating a little bit more.
Bill, can I just read out a comment from Caitlin that's really relevant to this conversation? Thanks, Caitlin. It's a great comment that you've made. I have also seen that the individual's personal issues make it hard for a manager to have a conversation about work because they don't want to add to the person's problems. So the line between personal life from work performance becomes blurred. We're talking about switch off manager brain. And this is a great example of that blurred line, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big distinctions that I make is the brain's just another body part. So when other body parts are having difficulties, such as our lungs, such as your tummy, such as whatever, then fundamentally the individual, we all have that kind of self-awareness, no stigma around our body. And we would then have that self-awareness and then generally cut ourselves off to the doctor and do it, or other specialists do what we need to do. One of the big challenges that exists in the mental and emotional context is a lot of people don't have that self-awareness, and particularly if there's grief. If you're struggling with the grief, the sadness of relationship breakups, or loss of identity, or loss of someone really close, if there's underlying grief, underlying trauma conditions, then that self-awareness is often compromised. Now, the whole issue here is that under no circumstances are we even, thinking about manager becoming therapist, etc. It's about helping the manager be aware that their role is essentially helping the colleague, team member to become self-aware. And through good communication skills and empathy skills, etc., so that the individual then is personally responsible for themselves, and they fundamentally have that responsibility to get themselves into good shape to do the work that they're required to do, because there's a commercial arrangement. But there's a lot of sophistication in that as well. So one of the key distinctions that we make around empathy versus sympathy is that, we've touched on this before in some previous webinars. Empathy, if we look at the Greek, empathy is about them. So the M is into, and the pathy is pathos, meaning feelings. So into their feelings. So we kind of know the theory of that, when we're empathetic with someone, we're connecting into their feelings. Now, sympathy, is similar, empathy, feelings. And one of the huge traps that we all have made, is that we do the sharing, or we make similar our feelings. So someone, let's say, shares, I'm going through a difficult patch, let's say a relationship, and it might be either in a work context or whatever. And sympathy, similar, the thinking is I then talk about my feelings, because I'm demonstrating sympathy, or, that I'm having similar feelings. And as we know, this is incredibly toxic. Doesn't work, because what the person needs is that they've shared what's going on for them, and reflective listening that must be really tough for you. Have you got resources? Have you got support? How are you going with that? So we keep the focus of the conversation on the other person. But most people don't have this awareness. So sympathy is often self-pathy. We talk about our feelings, and we offload, download, share our feelings inappropriately. And this is where a lot of managers, if they don't understand this, they think that when they have these conversations, and they're having a conversation with a team member at the context of the person level, that if that person shares something that's going on for them, then if manager brain does sympathy, then they think they've got to actually share their own experience, or talk about their own feelings, or tell the person what to do, which is totally inappropriate, totally dysfunctional, totally not going to work. And so this is where we're teaching managers to actually have a different skill set, because all of the research identifies that when someone feels just heard and listened to, we don't need to solve their problem. Then there's a whole lot of research, we're all smart, the brain activates itself to actually solve the problem itself. So the workshop will cover, what would be the signs that managers will be noticing, what are the causes of those generally. Sometimes they're work-related or aggravated by work. What are the challenges in having the conversations, the skills involved that I've just talked about, and then the resources for the manager to self-care, and also for the resources for the other to be supported as well. Predominantly with self-care resources, and then with professional resources also. So I think we're in a good spot here now to so just very high level, key theme there is that helps managers to avoid saying the wrong thing, giving advice, or trying to solve the other person's problems, which they can't because they're not trained in, and it's not their role. And also to be able to separate the personal issues from the performance issues. So identifying the signs of mental unwellness, helping team members, etc. So at this point, Carli, we've got the opportunity to share an example, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Bill. So I'm just going to ask April to take yourself off mute and turn your camera on. Case studies are very, very popular part of our online event series. We always get feedback from other attendees to say, actually hearing from other businesses and other people in my role is really helpful to me. It puts it in much more perspective. So good morning. Hello, April.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to have you here today. I'm just going to do a quick intro. So we're about halfway through this event. So this is a really good time while April is sharing with us her experience of doing safe skills training, that if you want to ask questions or you want to put ideas or comments, this is a really good time to ask questions to Bill, to myself, or to April while we have her on the line. So I would like to introduce April Hicks, who's the Employee Support Officer at Tees Australia, working within the red meat industry. So we do a lot of work with federal and state government leading research projects in the wellbeing space across the red meat industry, and Tees is one of our clients. So We have gone with Tees on the whole journey. So all the way from workplace assessment, collecting data, right through to writing mental health and wellbeing strategy. And we are now at implementation and facilitation point where Bill has been facilitating safe conversation skills training at Tees. So April, welcome to the session. We would just like to hear a little bit about what your experience has been like doing this training at Tees. Can we just start off by hearing a little bit about what you've learnt in the training?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me was understanding, and especially in my role within Tees, is that my responsibility is not to fix the problem. My responsibility is just to connect them with resources that can help. And also how to have that conversation. Most people, I think, I learned from safe conversations is they just want to be heard. They just want someone to listen. So just being able to, rather than trying to fix the problem all the time, just be there to listen. Some people just want to be heard and some people do want solutions. So being able to have that conversation safely to say, do we work together to find help? Or do you just want to be heard and get it out? And that's sort of why I have this role, so they can come to me about work-related issues, not work-related issues, and just get it out, close the door, and
yeah. It's a habit we're in, right? Especially in social situations where we're going, oh yeah, me too, I've had this, or why don't you try this and fix it? And you just kind of move on. But in a work environment, you really want to create that space Bill's been talking about, to have empathy. And as you said, maybe listen, not jump in and ask them what they actually need and want. So yeah. I think it's really valuable new habit, maybe a lot of us can start working on. So what happens after training? What has been put into practice? Have you seen anything for you or for other people about what's actually working?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, and Bill and I spoke about this when we had our session, is a big part is the shift of the perspective shift. Is so much of what we do in our business, if there's a problem, we fix and we problem solve and all of those things. And I think that's inherently built into a lot of people to see it as a, as the product, I guess. And, oh, there's a problem, we're going to fix it, band-aid it, whatever, and then keep on going. And so, yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me was being able to just give them time and, not rush anything. And in the end, there's so much more rewarding outcomes from giving them space at the time than trying to, rush through it and band-aid it and keep on moving.
Fantastic. So creating that time and space for them has been really valuable.
Yeah.
Great. And so you mentioned outcomes. What does that look like? What sort of results are you seeing when you can have the conversation like that?
I think we have a way more engaged workforce. I think for me personally, and the business that we work in, when I think I operate off of like loyalty a lot of the time, and being able to have a safe space with my managers that I can communicate things that I have going on in my personal life, just of, I'm feeling so overwhelmed. And in the end, once I get through that, because all of those things are only ever temporary, once I get through that, at the other side, I have a lot more loyalty to the business and a lot more loyalty to my managers to make sure that I am doing my best, even when through those tough times, to get the outcomes that they're looking for.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you, April. Let me open it up to everyone we have on the call today. If you've got a question about having a safe conversation or about safe conversation skills training, Bill and I and April are all here. This is a great time to ask questions. Just pop them into the chat box, or you might just have a comment about training. We will just keep this space open to have a look at questions and comments for a minute before we move on. Thank you, April. That's been really
You're
helpful.
welcome. No problem.
When I did the training with Bill, I was in an online session doing safe conversation skills training, and we were in a breakout room with a team leader. And we were doing the practicing of the new words, so creating that space and kind of trying to rephrase some of our old words we were used to saying, and we were practicing saying them. And I clearly remember him saying, I need to get off this call now and actually go and have this conversation with a team member. Like, it was so urgent to him that the way he had been having the conversation was not working. And it was like he was saying, now I've got the right words. Now I'm going to go and use them and see what happens in that conversation. So it was great to hear someone go and action that straight away. Thank you, Caitlin. I think our organisation would find this training for managers really helpful. We'll be in touch to discuss. Thank you, Caitlin. If there's no questions, we will keep moving along. Thank you, April.
I have a question I'd love to ask April. Or
Go for it, Bill.
comment on. One of the things, April, I just really resonated with that you shared there is that whole idea of loyalty. And I really thought that was particularly interesting and incredibly valuable in the sense that, and I think this comes from, I think the majority of people would generally feel this way, that if my manager cares about me and gives me space when I'm going through some stuff, then that for a lot of people, they would then reciprocate and have loyalty around that. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, well, I think if you've ever had, a good boss and someone that you really respect and you really feel like you can go to, and I've been really fortunate to have a lot of good bosses, there's an element that I want to do my best for them. And when I'm going through my own personal things outside of work, I know that they are going to be a safe place for me to, I may not tell them my whole life story, but I can say, we have a trusting relationship that I can say to them, like, I'm really overwhelmed. Not here, but there's some things going on that I just am working through, and they've always been really supportive of me sort of getting to the other side of that. Yeah. And then in turn, when I sort of, like I said, when I get through whatever hurdles I'm trying to jump over, at the other side, I have a way greater commitment to them and to the business for for performance, my productivity, all of those things, because I was able to take the time and space to go deal with whatever I needed to deal with. And that doesn't mean necessarily I've taken any time off, just knowing that they have my back, I guess. And then in turn, I have theirs at the other end.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Thank you. And just one example, I think you share with me that there's a lot of palm workers, a lot of and what would be an example of where with that sort of demographic, that group of, and often guys, what's been an example of how you've been able to help them specifically, April?
Yeah, so I think in the Pacific, mental health is something that's, it's still new to all of us, but to them it's almost non-existent. It's not a concept at all. So being in a space where their feelings are validated, or that they can openly express them and be heard, is can just that in general can be overwhelming without including their feelings. Yeah, I guess that's probably been the main thing, is understanding, taking the time to understand their cultures, taking the time to understand, if you're at home, how they would work through it at home, and understanding that they're so far away from everything they know, a lot of them have told me that, like, I was the first white person they've ever seen. So that was just like mind-blowing to me. So yeah, being able to understand them and their cultures, and taking the time to ask questions outside of those safe conversations, and have a genuine interest in where they come from, makes when you do get to that point of safe conversations, you know, like funerals are a great example. If they have a death back home, that's usually like a 2-3 week process. You know, they spend time with the deceased, and there's a whole ceremony and things like that, and it's a 2-week process. And in Australia, we sort of have like a 2-day, we go, you know, they pass away, we're sad, we come back to work, and then we go to the funeral and we're sad, and then we go back to work, and we just keep it moving. Whereas for them, it's so different to anything that we, you know, or any funerals I've been to. So just understanding what that process is like, and understanding that it's going to take a lot more recovery time because their process is just so different. So yeah, just those little things mean a lot to them. And then in turn, they know they can come and talk to me, and I have a general understanding.
Fantastic. That's lovely. Thank you very much
You're welcome.
for that example. Thank you very much, April,
Bye.
for your time. All righty. So we shall continue on.
There's a comment from Nikki. I've had some terrible bosses and been in some toxic environments. I'm now in a place where my manager has provided support through what turned into an awful year last year. So I find I'm happier coming to work than I was where I wasn't supported. This is the whole retention piece, right? This is the bottom line for companies. If they are looking after people, listening, creating that space, people want to stay working for those managers who are open to that. That's the whole loyalty piece, April. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had, and I think we've had these situations of, you know, not highly desirable bosses. And that's why one of the things I'm really passionate about is because we can change this. You know, these fundamentally, often many of these people are not, you know, not normally not nice people, but they're fundamentally, in many instances, they don't have the skills and the awareness around how to engage in these conversations. Because one of the fears is, you know, people get weak on me, they'll take advantage of me, you know, all of those kinds of things. But, you know, the world's changing, we're smarter people, and better skills for leaders and managers and team leaders is really important. So if you look at the next slide there, please, Carli, just conscious of, would be really interesting to hear. So those of you who are on your psychosocial safety journey, what have been the main hazards that have been identified in your organizations? This is the list here of the common psychosocial hazards, and we'd just be interested to kind of hear from some of you what are the most prominent ones, and you know, at some level, kind of what will be the, you know, the approach in terms of how it is you plan to go about dealing with those. Because a lot of organizations, let's say, for example, you've got high work demands, or let's say you've got one company that I've done some work with, they found a lot of examples of bullying and harassment showed up. And so, you know, so you can give managers a policy, you know, here's what to do and how to do it, or, you know, what to do and how to do it. But then how to actually operationalize that is the absolute key. So did you want to speak to anything in relation to this, Carli?
Yeah, I think it's just important, once you've identified your hazards and you're going into mitigation and control, absolutely refer to the code of practice, managing psychosocial hazards in the workplace. There is an appendix in the back that gives you some really good actions you can take. So there are organizational actions such as policy changes or job role changes, but there's also employee things. So when it comes down to how am I actually going to have these conversations with people to start to mitigate some of those risks, we just want to encourage you to be aware and consider what is the best lens, what is the best approach for me to take when I'm having these conversations about what can be tricky topics, right? High workload, we don't have enough people, the workload's going to stay. How do we actually have a conversation about that? So it's a good point to pause when you're doing your action plan and be really thoughtful about the way you proceed with your employees.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. And because one of the interesting things is doing some work recently looking at various responses from a legal perspective. And it's on one of the kind of websites of an organization or the firm called Law Partners. What is considered as negligence by my employer? Your employer is negligent if they knew about the situation that led to your psychological injury and they failed to take action. In other words, they were aware of the risk and they had a duty of care. And in the example there, if you were a victim of bullying harassment from your work colleagues and management knew that they didn't take any action, then there's potential claims for a psychological injury claim. Now, there's a lot of complexity and sophistication around this, but the landscape's changing and we need to be much more aware. So this will be a particular case where, in theory, why didn't the managers who are familiar, enter into conversations and start to unravel? And in the case of where people really arc up and get very angry, one of the things I used to think is that angry people were just born that way and had some kind of, in my opinion, serious mental health issues. But the reality is that what's often happening is that there are unmet needs. There are really difficult things that are potentially going on, and the person doesn't get talked to, not understood. They're difficult conversations, but often there's a lot of difficulty that's going on in that person, and they keep smashing out their grief, their sadness, in anger. So if we look at the next slide, please, Carli. So as I just touched on, it's the ability and the bravery and the courage, the smarts of managers to have these conversations and in a range of contexts. And one of the things we teach is being proactive, really connecting. And sometimes managers have just fabulous relationships with their team, but others don't, because they don't want to get into the people stuff. It's a bit yucky because they think it's their problem to solve. As we've been saying, it's not. You got to develop the skills to connect in. And then, so resources, for example, both resources for others, taking breaks, noticing what the triggers are, using the breath, understanding the negativity spiral. When change is going on, people can just, spiral into a lot of negativity, understanding how to get out of that stuff, going for walks, making sure sleep's good, connecting in with others, etc. And then, these are like seemingly basic, but they're just so important and they need to be led by the manager. And then the additional resources, professional resources, are helplines and EAP, and then specialist services as well. It's really important for the manager to understand it, because when the manager has safe conversations and it's emotionally triggering, what a manager has to be aware of is that they have those feelings, that they need to debrief those feelings in some shape or form, either with their EAP, either through their own resources, or otherwise through helplines, things like that. And this is a really important theme around self-care. And it's also, it's being introduced in first responder environments, and it's been in my environment in Lifeline. How we look after ourselves is through debriefing. There's no shame in it. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just a good, normal human being, but we need to look after ourselves. So the workshop covers off both the structure and then gets down into the specifics around what specific skills are needed and specific examples. So managers can come out with specific examples that they can start to work with and practice with, and start to make a difference. And then as we're heading towards the final slides here, so I've written a book on this, which captures it. It's a book called Safe Conversations for Work and Life. By all means, you can, connecting with me, connecting with Carli as well, to get a copy of that. That provides an underpinning. But then the workshop is just kind of blows that out. And also I have an online course associated with it as well, which goes for an hour. There's 2 examples of feedback there. We've worked with the Independent Liquor Group and Tees, and and Visi and kind of a whole range of other organizations as well, Bradkin, Aspen, etc. And so in the last slide here, so Carli, do you want to take over from here?
Thanks, Bill. So we just like to give all of our attendees some free wellbeing resources, a little bit of extra value for you. Bill has very kindly offered to gift everybody today this fantastic resource, which is called Manager Empathy Skills for Psychosocial Risk Management. So you are invited to scan the code on the screen. It will take you to a form. You can order any free wellbeing resources that you like that are in that form, including that document from Bill. There are also other corporate wellbeing resources on there. There are checklists, templates, calendar dates, all sorts of things. So tick any boxes that you like and I will shoot those over to you. There is also a question in the form that gives you an opportunity to ask for support. So that means if you would like to chat with us about safe conversation skills training, if you are interested in workplace assessments, whatever it is you need in wellbeing, you can tick any of those and we'd be happy to reach out to you. Probably start with a conversation, start with a call, find out what you need. We can show you what we have and see if we are a good fit for you. So all of the resources that you need, you can get on that code. So just scan that and click anything you need. And we have a couple of minutes remaining, so you are very welcome to ask questions, pop them in the chat box, or feel free to take yourself off mute. We love hearing from people if you'd like to talk as well. If anyone is jumping off, thank you for coming today. I'd like to invite you. We've got another 2 wellbeing events. We've got a very busy quarter. Next week, Charlotte Jamison is hosting Optimizing the Social Brain to Build Engagement. So Charlotte has done a lot of research in the last little while on reconnection, how we reconnect with people and how we communicate and that social side. So that is relevant to the workplace. So that's next week. And the week after, I am doing Tricks of a Nutritionist for super busy days, which does not include energy drinks. You may or may not be surprised to hear. So if you want to come along to any of those, these are free events. You can scan the codes to register. I'll flick back to the previous screen in case anyone missed that code. Bill and I are going to open up now for any questions or comments before we close.
Yes, I'd like to invite anyone who, you know, we shared here basically 2 kind of perspectives on conversations that we need to have, where they're challenging in the sense that the other person has a contrarian point of view, opposing point of view, and difficult conversations where the individual might be struggling with difficulties of their own. Anyone have a different perspective or point of view or like elaboration on that? That would be lovely. Otherwise, if we've landed it really clearly, Carli, then we're good to go.
Too good, Bill, too good. Caitlin makes a comment, building manager confidence is so important for these conversations to achieve a positive outcome or progress. Could not agree more, Caitlin. Thank you, Oriana, Sarah, Joy, Ash. I don't think we have any questions, Bill, so we might give everyone the gift of time of 5 minutes.
5 minutes, yes.
Don't waste it. Do some self-care, people, for 5 minutes. Enjoy this time.
Do some breathing.
Thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks, Marisha. Lovely to have